Tech industry
Yeah.
marketing is not about the tech. It's about the story. The sooner that you step into your professional authenticity, the sooner you're going to learn who has your back and who doesn't.
Hi, Lexi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I think you're fantastic. So I'm very honored to be here.
Well, the feeling's mutual. I met Lexi virtually, of course, as she has an amazing podcast, and we will definitely get into that. But Lexi is a storyteller. She is a community builder. She is an advocate in the workplace for equity. And then even more so impressive, she is a leader in the tech space. It really is a trajectory that keeps stacking with so many amazing moments. From being an entrepreneur to a storyteller to a leader. I want to take a step back, as I do all my guests, and start at the beginning. You went to Stanford. Talk to us about how you ventured into the tech space.
Yeah, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. And it sounds horrible. I always wanted to get out. People always ask me, like, why did you choose Stanford? And I was like, it's very simple. I think I was in second or third grade. And I looked at my parents and I'm like, I don't want to live here anymore. Right. I was a kid of the 90s. So I'm watching Living Single and I'm watching Under the Sheets and no one knew about it, Sex in the City. You know, I loved musicals. So like, I know what Broadway is. And I'm like, I want this big city life. So I went to my parents and I was like, I just want to go to Oxford. And they said, why Oxford? And real talk, for an 8-year-old, it was the only school that I knew that was outside of the country. And my dad looked at me and he said, okay, kid, 50 states. You can go wherever you want in the 50 states. And the second thing he said he said, I don't pay for out of state public tuition. And that was the conversation, which now that I'm a parent, I get. Like, why am I paying $70K for you to go to a public school out of state, but then your roommate who lives down the street is paying $2.50 for this semester? Financially, that irritates me. But I'm an adult and a parent. And so I went into an encyclopedia, RIP encyclopedias, and I tried.
That's a book for all those Gen Z listeners that we had to open per letter.
Yes. And I had all of them. And so I went into encyclopedia and I tried to figure out what is the farthest private school in the 50 states that I can go to. And for whatever reason, my 8-year-old brain was like Stanford. So since I was 8, I was like, I'm going to Stanford. Now, looking back, maybe not the best reasons why, but that was my North Star. So I get into Stanford and I go and I was like, I want to do fashion PR, something off the cuff, because Stanford's a very technical school. Stanford is one of the universities that helped build Silicon Valley. There's a reason why when you read about all of these great tech leaders, and when I use the word great, I define that as innovation for technology and product, that they moved in apartments down the street from Stanford and from Santa Clara University and from San Jose State. You had these computer science departments that really encouraged kids to just do weird and wild things. Like some of the classes that I was in at Stanford weren't even computer science based. And our professors were like, yes, go change the world, become an entrepreneur, make enough chapstick for aliens because they have chap lips too. You know, and so it's that kind of environment. And so again, being stubborn, I said, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. I want to be the Black Carrie Bradshaw. I want to be Kim Fields and Living Single. I want to live in New York. Yeah. It's a whole separate conversation for a separate day. Did some internships in fashion, came back to school my senior year. And I said, I never want to do that again. I never want to do that again. And so I spent my senior year really trying to figure out what I was going to do. And real talk, everyone kind of alluded to me that because I was about to be a Stanford graduate, it could be easy for me to get into tech because we live down the street. The next question then was, so what are you going to do after you get a job? But even my professors and my college counselors, all of them said, you know what, let's just take a few years to breathe. The fashion thing happened. It sounds like you don't want to do it. Let's just help you get a job in tech, because that's an easier bridge for us because we know so many people, and just do your job. We're not saying become the CEO, but do your job, make some money, help pay off some of these loans while you figure out your next step. And that's how I got into tech. It was supposed to be a temporary transition. And now we are here 20 years later.
Yeah. I love that so much. I know what you're talking about with that innate desire to envision yourself way beyond where you're currently as a child. I remember having that discussion with my dad too and saying, I'm going to live in New York City. And you just have this like seed planted in you. I think once you have it, you can't turn it off. I want to dig into deeper navigating the tech space. You've had so much great experience from working at Facebook, Airbnb, Twitter, now Microsoft. So how did you navigate and really like lean into growth?
So my first company was NetApp. Shout out to NetApp as a new college grad. This is a very long time ago. And I distinctly remember walking in on my first day and realizing very quickly that I had no idea what I was doing. Realizing very quickly that I got this job because of where I went to college, which is cute. And then you have to actually produce work. And starting to meet other new college grads, there was a cohort of us. And they were like, yeah, I majored in computer science and I did my undergrad thesis on blah, blah, blah robots. And I'm just like, I majored in comms and I have really good taste in shoes. And so I realized very quickly that I'm going to have to learn some things. And so in my first 6 months at NetApp, I was trying to figure out, what does an engineering program manager do? And again, shout out to my dad. I remember talking to him the day before I started work. And he's a doctor. So he's very much like, I don't know how to navigate corporate spaces. And he said, you need to go buy yourself a Stanford cup. I was like, that's very specific. Why? And he said, I'm assuming there are a lot of people at your job who went to Stanford. And by you having something in that room that shows that, then maybe people will just come to you and just help you because you're young.
Okay.
You're like the baby of the group. And people love helping babies. And I was like, good job, Dr. Butler. So I bought this Stanford cup. I put it on my desk so everybody could see.
Yeah.
And within the first 6 months, I had a few leaders actually like, oh, I went to Stanford too. It wasn't about Stanford or the eliteness that people perceive that title to have. I just started making friends in leadership because of the connection and because of this 12-ounce coffee cup. And when I made friends with them, I just asked them to help me do my job. And the interesting thing about program management and operations within technology is that a lot of it is not taught in a book. It's understanding EQ. It's understanding how to communicate. It's really understanding how to build relationships. And I would say the night job is really understanding the technology. So I had these few leaders who had no problem taking me to lunch or taking me to happy hour. And I would ask them, I would just list out questions. Yeah, I know him. He's rude. Let it go. Oh, yeah. Okay, this person wants this thing this way. And so I would just start creating these templates for myself based on what they said. It was honestly like going to college again, of just learning how to adult in a space where you have different types of people, how to understand passive aggressive communication from leaders. So how to know that when a leader says, maybe it could be cool if we actually made a slide deck for tomorrow. That means, girl, you making a slide deck tonight, right? And like understanding what that means while on the weekends, really studying the technology that my engineering teams were building. So therefore, when I went into rooms with them, they respected me, right? When you talk to engineers, when you talk to people who build things, you cannot walk into a room with them and then expect them to do what you say when they think like, oh, well, she don't know what she's doing. Right. Yeah. And so that's what I learned. I also learned very quickly that adulting in general is very, very hard. So after I had people in my corner that were willing to help to teach me how to do the job, then it was really about adulting. Within my first year, I actively decided I have no idea what I'm doing. Of course, I wouldn't tell anybody, but I'm going to fake it till I make it. So I'm literally going to copy and paste how other people who perceive to be powerful in this room act. It wasn't authentic. At the end of my first year, my first job, I was on a performance improvement plan. They were about to fire me. And what I realized when that conversation happened was a few things. One, my first manager out of college, I'll be the first one to say, I don't know if that person was the best person to manage a new college grad. Managing new college grads, Brittany, is very different than managing a real adult.
Yes.
But
yes.
Two, I wasn't doing a great job. I was learning all these tools. I was learning all this knowledge. I had a lot of leaders who had faith in me, but clearly it wasn't sticking because now I want a performance improvement plan. So I went home and I just decided, look, I'm just now going to be me. I'm not going to pretend to be somebody else. I'm not going to copy the lingo that you use. I'm just going to be direct and going to be me. Because if I get fired, if I have to go back to St. Louis without a job, I'm going to do it acting like me.
I'm curious in that piece of it. You said you were going to be more direct, but
Yeah.
what else were you holding back?
I think I was holding back because I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I am I love to practice. Remember, I'm a musical theater kid by trade ever since I was 5 years old. And being a person on a stage, practice is your playground. So to come to work, I'll never forget July 5th, 9 a.m., all those years ago, and to not have a space to practice, to feel like I have to be perfect in every single room, but I have no idea what the steps are. No idea
Yeah.
what the steps are. For musical theater people, that's like somebody saying, hey, you just got the gig for the chorus line. The show's in 3 hours. What? What? Like that's inconceivable. And so I think I was holding back because I knew that I didn't have the steps. I knew that I have no idea what's going on. I knew that I took one computer science class that my undergraduate school required me to do. I don't know how to code, right? And so I did hold myself back. This is a new environment. These are new people. And I was usually one of the only women in the room. And I was
Hmm.
always the only Black human in the room. And so I always
Yeah.
felt like there was a target on my back. So instead of
Yeah.
being myself, well, one, I think it's very hard for a 22-year-old to be themselves. You don't know who you are
Right.
yet. So that was also part of it, is like learning who I want to be in this new adulting phase that I'm in. But also it was like the person that I want to be is that socially acceptable in this environment. And after I was almost fired, I just remember having this very indignant power move where I just walked into work. I put on my gold hoops. I braided my hair and I was like, I'm back, because I just decided you're going to fire me regardless. So I'm just going to go out with a bang. And when I started doing that and being more direct about my needs, my wants, my voice, being the person in the room who wasn't afraid to raise their hand and say the hard thing, I started attracting a lot more positive attention at work. And that's what really
Yeah.
started building my professional career, because I started attracting the people who liked these qualities about me. And I started respectfully pushing away the people who didn't. And I think the lesson there is that the sooner that you step into your professional authenticity, the sooner you're going to learn who has your back and who doesn't. And that's a beautiful thing to know.
Yeah. There's so much here. I think one of the things you said that really hit home for me was this piece of identity. And when we move into adulthood and we move out of college, which is very different environment,
Yeah.
it's safe, it's
Mm-hmm.
known, you know your professors, you are all together in this cohesive culture. And then you go into a work environment that has so many different backgrounds, and we assume that we need to morph into
Oh,
fit the culture versus show up as ourselves. And not only that piece of it, but then you also have your own self as well that is going through the growth and change of going from a university into the workplace. So I just feel like I understand so much of that complexity with like who am I in this space, and then you also have to do the work and show
yeah.
up.
Yeah,
So it's so much to navigate.
it is.
Oh my goodness. Then I want to unpack a little bit more of the storytelling piece that has come through in your
Yeah.
career, and this ability that you have tapped into your voice. Now, how did you, as the years went on, really start to step into this space as that storyteller and that facilitator?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound horrible, but when you're the only one in a specific identity, you're always tapped to
Mhm.
stand up on a stage. I had someone tell me a few days ago, and I will never forget this. She said, when you know you're the pet and you become a threat. And I was like, wow, that is such a profound statement. And
Wow.
I think in the early
Yeah.
stages of my career, for leaders that I worked for, worked with, saw me in the hallway, I think I was kind of a pet. And I'm not going to lie, ego aside, I think I used that to my advantage, right? I knew that I
Mhm.
was one of the youngest women at the company. I was a new college grad. And I forget the exact breakdown of my new college grad class, but it was maybe 100 or so 22-year-olds, right? And I
Yeah.
remember we
Yeah.
would have these events like once every 3 months, and I would go, and there were under 10 women. I was
Wow.
also the only Black woman of all of my whole cohort.
Yeah.
And there was only 2 Black people, this Black guy. So when I realized that, I said, okay, well, I'm going to be a highlighter, whether I like it or not. If I do great work, it's going to be highlighted. If I make a mistake, it's going to be highlighted. And so I realized that very quickly. And once I started tapping into my voice, and these leaders that were helping me in my first year, by the second year, they were like, Lexi, do you want to go to this stage on Saturday? Because of course they're older, they have kids, they have husbands, they have wives, they have dogs and goldfish. They're not trying to go to some conference on a Saturday at 11 a.m. And I was like, sure. Right. And I
Yeah.
remember I started doing that on behalf of my company. And then one day my company heard some things that I said that in my opinion were about my lived experience, not at
Mhm.
necessarily that specific company, but navigating adulting. And I got in trouble. And the comms team called me and it was a thing and it was very much a slap on the hand. And then I remember I said, okay, so moving forward, I'm not going to go on a stage and speak on behalf of any company. I'm just going to speak on behalf of me. And that's how we're going to work. Okay. And I also decided that anything that I was going to say on stage, I'm totally fine with my mom hearing, my grandparents hearing, and my boss hearing. And
Mhm.
that's been my rule ever since. But that's really how my storytelling really
Yeah.
developed. And I always tell people who want to do more storytelling professionally and speaking is I'm like, my first 2 years of speaking, I did it all for free. I just wanted to get on stage. And then one
Yeah.
day somebody was either dumb enough or smart enough to tell me I could get paid for it. And then that was a wrap. Right. I was like, wait a minute, there's money for this? Okay, we're done. No more free gigs. And that's
Yeah.
really how that storytelling has been built. I've always wanted to come to a space and tell an intricate story, but from that, there is a lesson. And I want it to
Mhm.
be authentic. I also want it to be received. And so I really work on
Yeah.
that in my storytelling. How do you bring something really, a really hard concept or a really ambiguous concept and find the wit and find the beauty, but still talk about the difficulty and encourage people to really think that through as they walk out of the room. Yeah.
That's such a phenomenal skill to not only have, but to continue to grow and to tap into, because it not only really puts you in a place that you are creating a space for others to connect
Mm-hmm.
and feel what you've felt, but it also storytelling itself. And you've probably, of course, seen this in the tech space, but storytelling is really powerful when you're at a company and can be able to very much share an idea or anything from data. Like that is so powerful. And I think so many professionals get overwhelmed in thinking of storytelling, but you put it so simply, like showing up and allowing yourself to really share the behind the scenes that you would share
Yeah.
with your family. I
And I
love
do
that.
want to add to that. I'm very fortunate. I come from a culture and a family of storytellers. I grew
Mhm.
up doing an activity, musical theater, which all that is storytelling. And
Yeah.
then I come into an industry, which in the beginning, I didn't really piece this together, but in the past few years I have, it's 100% storytelling. When I started working in tech. Now I'm going to date myself. This is like July 2011. I'm going to conferences with, I would argue, some of the best storytellers in the entire world. I'm going to rooms and getting invited to, like these 100-person conferences or these intimate dinners with 60 people. And you have Steve Jobs telling you
Wow.
about the new iPhone or telling you about the iPod or the new Mac computer. And he would never use the word computer, right? Even the CEOs of NetApp, when I was there, sold storage boxes. They kind of looked like little mini Wallies. And this is really pre the cloud, but where do you
Yeah.
store your data? And if we had CEOs and CMOs and leaders that got up on a stage and say, hey, come buy our Wally boxes, they're not going to get bought.
Yeah.
I think people also don't really realize in the tech industry that the leaders who are making up these companies, regardless of their computer science background or not, they are storytellers. After NetApp,
Yeah.
I went to Airbnb, and I always tell people Airbnb was one of the most transformative storytelling experiences of my life because the founders of Airbnb are not computer scientists. They went
Yeah.
They went to a graphic design school. They're artists. We would actually joke in the company when I was there that Airbnb is not really a tech company, but a social experiment. We were like, what is going on? And we just happened to use technology to bring people together, but that's not the product. The product is the story. And so I spent 2 years at Airbnb, honestly working with some of the world's greatest marketers, and to be in those rooms and to hear how they tell stories and to like walk in the room and say, okay, so I'm working on discrimination. How do you make that sound great? Right. And then to hear them say, okay, well, discrimination is never great. And I'm like, true. But how do we tell this story of all these amazing things we're doing to combat discrimination? And so a lot of my storytelling was also influenced by these people who are just world storytellers. And I think a lot of people don't realize about that, about the tech industry. Tech industry marketing is not about the tech. It's about the story. And I've been very fortunate to learn hand in hand with these people that are just like Pulitzer Prize winning storytellers. It's incredible. Yeah.
I get that so much. I was in the beauty space for years, and I would want to sit in the room with marketers. I hired marketing and I said, let me sit in the room because I want to hear how they talk about a product. And you're right. Like, it was not about beauty. It was not, it was all about the feelings and the experience of the impact of that product, but it wasn't itself about it. And so I love that so much. And I think for so many professionals in this day and age, I think we're so hyper focused on certain skills. It's overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, but wait, it's simple. Come back to the story of it. And that's really powerful.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I highly recommend, like, I remember, so Steve Jobs wrote an autobiography, and I think it came out like either right before he died or right after he died. And I remember everybody in the Silicon Valley got this book. I remember, like, and it's, by the way, it's a pretty thick book, y'all, like encyclopedia thick. Steve had a lot of thoughts. He had a lot of thoughts. And I remember reading the book. I would get to work early and sit in my car and read the book and like trying to get this book. And I always tell folks, like, if you really want to see how these people think, read the book. Like the Steve Jobs autobiography, there's a really great book about how Netflix was created. One of my favorite books actually is by the guy who founded Nike called Shoe Dog. I read that book in a day. I was like, I cannot believe this is how we got here. And you realize that a lot of these people who are building the conglomerates of capitalism, it's actually the story. It's the story and it's the feeling. And so I think it is a talent that I continue to try to get better at, but it is a talent that will also keep you paid.
I love it so much. The last thing I want to talk about, because it's near and dear to my heart, is creating a community that inspires. And you have done this. You're the founder of Sister Circle, Black Women in Tech. And I want to hear what motivated you to create this community and how it's impacted its members.
Yeah. So when I was at NetApp for 4.5-ish years. And I remember at about year 3, I was itching to do something else, but I didn't quite know what to do. And again, new to adulting. So I spent a lot of those 3 years networking with inside my company and also just trying to figure out who I was outside of work. I didn't have this large network outside of work. And the people that I knew outside of work were former NetApp people who had transitioned to different companies while I was there. So I just started applying to all these companies. I remember in a 3-month period, I applied to over 200 companies. I'm a Capricorn, so of course I wrote everything down. God and the ancestors decided that Airbnb and I were going to be a fit. And so when I went to Airbnb, that's when I really said, okay, I need to build a network outside of just the company that I work at. Also, when I went to Airbnb, it was quite a small company. I think we were 2,000 people.
Wow.
So if I had just networked at Airbnb, I'm like, we gonna know everybody in 2 days. Like, what are we doing? And so I realized very quickly in my transition from NetApp to Airbnb that transition would have been a lot easier if I knew a lot more people. And so when I get to Airbnb, I join the Black ERG, the Black Employee Resource Group. Again, Airbnb is small, regardless of color. So the Black Employee Resource Group is much smaller. And I remember going to my first meeting and I just had this idea where I said, yo, it would be great if I could know other Black people in tech. Then it just so happened that at the company that I was working for, I was doing this job where I had to hold leaders accountable. And I was very scared to do that. I was very scared to walk into a room with the head of policy and be like, so why's your work not done? Right? That's a little daunting. Even for me now, I probably would not do that to that policy at my company. And I was not doing a great job. And there was a man at the company who I highly admire, who happened to be a white man. And he pulled me aside one day and he was like, "You are failing." And I said,
Wow.
"Okay." And he said, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "Sure." And by the time he said that, I knew that I was failing, Brittany. I was like, this is not working.
Yeah.
And he pulled me aside and he was like, "Look," he said, "you have to hold these leaders accountable. And you walk in these rooms and you pretend like the thing that they were supposed to do yesterday was not actually important, but it's important." And so he looked at me and he said, "So I don't understand why you just don't say, 'Where is your work?'" And I looked at him and I said, "Because you can cuss people out. I can't."
Yeah.
And he got very quiet and he said, "Okay." He said, "Can I give you a name to someone who also happens to be a Black woman? And maybe she can give you some pointers." And he said, "Because hear me out, Lexi, regardless of the reason why, if you do not update your behavior pretty quickly, this isn't going to work out." So intention versus impact. And so I talked to her. They were former colleagues in a previous life. And basically, she had never worked in tech before. She was in government. And so she gave me some pointers. And then she said, "You need to go find people like me in tech, because tech is a little bit different than government. And I want to make sure that the tips that I'm giving you, they're translatable in the tech industry." And she gave me a name to another Black woman in tech who was like some senior VP at a major company. And I talked to her. And I remember talking to her with such a beautiful relief. And that's when one day on Facebook, I just said, "I'm just going to make a group for Black women in tech because maybe other people also want these types of conversations."
Yeah.
And it just turned into this like 20,000 plus community within 3 years.
Wow.
And we would like go to brunches. We would go to Soul Cycle class together, started partnering with other companies for recruitment purposes and talking about what it looks like to see yourself in rooms. And regardless of all of those fancy things that we did, my favorite thing was the basis of being able to say, "Hey, I know someone at that company. Do you want to talk to them? Do you want a referral? Do you want to talk about negotiations?" Negotiations in tech are huge. You could have somebody making $5 a year and the person sitting next to them doing the same job is making $75 a year. So like, do I have a conversation about your money not being funny, and really kind of building this, not kind of, but really building this underground railroad for this marginalized group of people, because there's not a lot of us at all of these companies. So what does it look like if we all had this network with all of these companies worldwide?
For other professionals in my community, where can they find you if they want to follow more,
Yeah.
connect with you? Yeah.
Yeah. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my boo. I love LinkedIn. That's how we met, on LinkedIn.
Same. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Love
love
it.
having conversations that are authentic about specifically how to treat people at work and how you hold yourself accountable at work. Because I think that those lessons, regardless of industry, are very, very important in the
Yeah.
labor force. And so, yes, please hit me up on LinkedIn. I would love to connect. I also have a show on YouTube called Sit with Lexi B, where I invite people like yourself to come and tell me a lesson that they had to learn and navigate for their career. And that's really been this great creative outlet for me since becoming a mom. So yeah.
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 I love it so much. Thank you, Lexi, for being here. And I can't wait to hopefully have some more conversations with you in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah. Of
Thank
course.
you.
Thank you.